Back at the turn of the century, not too far from here, some of the most gallant and valiant soldiers ever to serve in the United States Army were stationed at the Presidio. They came south down through San Jose on their way to Los Banos. The 9th Cavalry turned east towards the mountains and went to Yosemite, Sequoia, and Kings Canyon. Whoa, 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 shorty. Those troopers were all African American, and they were some of the first men ever to protect the national parks. In American military history, they are known for their outstanding service, dedication to duty, and they were called the Buffalo Soldiers.
Military at least offered the type of dignity that a person could have being a soldier, plus $13 a month, plus a uniform or a horse, 3 meals a day. You get to see the Wild West. It was something that I think many African American men saw as the only way that they could learn a trade, learn skill, and get education.
187,000 African American troops served in the Union Army during the Civil War. At the end of the war, in 1865, the Army was demobilized, but Congress decided to keep 2 units, the 9th and the 10th Cavalry, as part of the small standing army of 20,000 men in uniform. Those troopers would play a critical role in the settling of the West.
Once they moved out to the West, actually they weren't known as Buffalo Soldiers, they were simply colored regulars. But when they encountered the Plains Indians, the Kiowa, the Ute, the Lakota, the Apache, Comanche, those Indians thought that the Buffalo's fierce fighting spirit reminded them of these soldiers. So they affixed that name to them. And when the African American soldiers heard that they were being referred to as Buffalo Soldiers, some of them, I think, sort of smiled, and some of them thought, well, is this a compliment or what? Then they began to find out that the buffalo was a sacred animal of the Plains Indians, and they wore that name with honor.
San Jose historian and lecturer Anthony Powell holds a precious link to the past and the Buffalo Soldiers. Raised by his grandfather, Samuel Nathan Waller, in Los Angeles in the 1950s, Powell would listen to the stories of a man who had actually served for 40 years, from 1887 to 1927, as a Buffalo Soldier.
He was 13 and a half, country boy from Tennessee. The Army did a couple of things that were fundamental that we Americans promised to give to all of our citizens. Number one was an education. I mean, he was totally illiterate when he joined the Army in 1887. If you had known him, you would not have known that he didn't have other than a master's degree because he was that well read. The Army gave him something else that was very important. It gave him the opportunity to travel beyond the confines of Tennessee, to literally traverse the world. But it gave him a third thing that I think is most important of all. It gave him an 8 to 5, a job with a secure future and a retirement at the end of it. And I think that is something that he never forgot, something that helped to mold his young life. And for 40 years, he was a soldier.
Armed with a master's degree from the University of Southern California in history, Powell made it a point to talk with his grandfather's friends who had also served with the Buffalo Soldiers.
The soldiers themselves are important because they served at a time when, for the average African American, securing a job was something that was almost impossible to get. But serving as a soldier gave them the opportunity to elevate themselves to a higher level. When I was interviewing my grandfather's contemporaries, I'd always start out by asking, why did you join the Army? One old man looked at me and he says, I joined the Army because I like the uniform. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, oh, here we go. I said, what about the uniform? He says, well, the feeling that it gave me. And I said, well, what was that feeling? It said, it gave me a part of the American dream.
Life on the plains was rugged and hard-fought. The uniform for the men of the Buffalo Soldiers came to symbolize what it meant to serve in the cavalry and the U.S. Army.
When you look at images of African American soldiers of that post-Civil War period all the way up till today, what do you see? You see dignity, you see pride, you see respect by the wearing of that uniform. And so that's what the guy meant. And it took me a while to fully appreciate what he meant, but he was testy about it. That, yeah, it was the uniform. And so when he got a chance to come home to Indianapolis, he was strutting in that dress blue uniform, and he was proud that he was a soldier of America.
The Indian Wars, a brutal campaign against the Native Americans, was waged until 1893 and the settling of the West. While those battles are long over, Hollywood stereotypes still linger in everyone's mind and shade the actual history of the time.
I grew up with John Wayne. And to this day, don't get me wrong, I enjoy a John Wayne movie to the very day. She wore a yellow ribbon, Fort Apache, all that stuff. Loved it. But the reality of the West was that 1 in 5 soldiers was a black man. I recounted every engagement that was fought by U.S. troops against Native Americans from the end of the Civil War to 1893, and 85% involved black soldiers. And so this group of men served in 85% of the actual combat against Native Americans. Now, it's not to suggest that they did not kill Native Americans, because they did. That was the role of a soldier. They not only served to keep them on the reservation, but to put them there. And they did a fairly good job about it.
The Buffalo Soldiers would eventually go on to fight in the Spanish-American War in Cuba and also in the Philippines. Following those conflicts, one unit was stationed at the Presidio in Monterey and one in San Francisco. President Teddy Roosevelt visited San Francisco in 1903, and the Buffalo Soldiers served as his honor guard. The 9th Cavalry was pressed into duty yet again, and once more they would excel. Led by Captain Charles Young, the Buffalo Soldiers hit the trail heading south from San Francisco and began the work that would secure the national parks for future generations.
During the summer, the soldiers were there to make sure that poachers were kept at bay and that the roads were built throughout the parks to enable access to them. And that's the job that these guys got, during the 1902, 1903, 1904, 1905 period. And so they did indeed come right through San Jose, because this was the way following the railroad, to the national parks. And they would camp, as a matter of fact, they camped near the fairgrounds are today on their way to, Sequoia National Park.
There are over 400 graves of the Buffalo Soldiers at the Presidio in San Francisco. There's also a lasting legacy of pride, honor, and duty that was shared among the men. You can trace that history even today to the mounted officers of the National Park Service that still patrol the Presidio on horseback. Samuel Nathan Waller would live to be 105 years old, and the stories that he told his grandson so long ago would fuel the fire that has kept that flame alive.